Welcome back, everybody, to Missed Apex Formula E podcast. We are all charged up and ready to go. Howdy, everybody. We are here. It is an off week, and we are just having a great time. For some reason, I thought it was a fantastic idea to agree to record this at 3 p.m. These guys' time, which is 7 a.m. for me. So enjoy me, hyped up on coffee, slightly overtired, and having to deal with all of this is, of course, Chris Stevens. Hi, Chris. Are you ready
Hey,
for another
Macy.
experience with me?
I'm always ready for an experience with you. And we have a lot to go through. We've had some listener questions in. It's going to be a nice mailbag episode. And there's been quite a bit of news, quite big news, since we left Mexico City.
It's very true. We've had the announcement that Fast Charge, or Pit Boost, as it is officially going to be called, is finally arriving. This one has been delayed how many times now? Have we kept count? Have we lost count?
I've lost count. All I can remember is the testing started a little over 2 years ago.
And now we're finally here. And it's, to be clear, it's not at every single race either. It is only for one out of every double header. So it's like a part-time appearance specialty every once in a while. So we will dig into that. And we will also have joining us, of course, Spanners.
Hello. This is I guess it's a mailbag show. With the F1 show, we're always saying, well, you know, we're all equal level knowledge really between the listeners and the panel. So just give us your opinion. Tell us what you reckon. But actually, there's a lot of people who are Formula E curious.
Their parents are telling them it's just a phase. It's not a phase, Dad!
This is who I am. Oh my word. And who we are people who are going to learn a little bit right off the bat about Pit Boost, because we've gotten a little bit of information, not too much, but here's the quick overall. 10% energy increase, 3.85 kilowatts. You're going to get 30 seconds for which to do that in the pits. It is mandatory to take, and only one car per team can take it at a time. So that'll be fun to manage right off the bat, you can tell.
Exactly. So it is similar to Formula One in the sense that you can only box one car at a time. So there is going to have to be a priority set, isn't there? In Formula E, it's quite rare to see teammates running line astern because the gaps between the teams are so small. And so it won't be a massive issue, I think, in terms of teammates kind of racing each other to the box that you sometimes see in Formula One. But either way, you're going to have to prioritize a car, and I think that could lead to a little bit more internal debate between two sides of the garage. What's really interesting about this, for me anyway, is that if you have an early incident, you can get back into the race because you can then take your mandatory stop early. You can't do it on the first lap. I think it's after the end of lap 2 that they open it up. When they started mooting the idea of introducing it this season, they were going to impose all sorts of restrictions of like, it's going to have to be between these laps and we won't tell you what the laps are until half an hour before the race, a bit like how attack mode used to be. But now they've just kind of opened it up and said, you know what, just do it whenever you feel like it. So you can, you know, you knock your front wing off, you survive a couple of laps, come in, do your pit stop early and then blast to the end. Obviously there needs to be an amount of energy to put back into the battery. So if we're talking it's 10% of the battery storage, then you can't come in with 95% of the battery remaining, obviously, because you would only take 5% of it. So I'm curious to see how it's going to play out.
And important to point out, it also is in addition to attack mode. It's not replacing or anything like that. So they now have three moments of extra power they have to manage.
Yeah, so I like that kind of get out of jail free card. We had that in our iRacing series as well for a little while. So you get involved in that first lap incident. All isn't lost because you can just sort of revert to this secondary strategy of, well, okay, I am at the back of the grid, but you know, maybe the safety car I caused by shunting into the back of someone will benefit me and allow me to catch up to the back of the grid. But also, these cars are fairly robust. So yes, you can operate with a front wing just sort of dangling off for a little while, as long as you survive lap 1, lap 2, or however long until you're allowed to pit. You almost get a free repair now in Formula E. So yeah, how long will the charging take, and can you change a front wing in that time?
So it's 30 seconds to do 10%, which is, I think, double the fastest, road car charging technology available out there at the moment. And you can change tires during the stop, but you can't do it while the charge is taking
Got it.
place. So
Yeah.
it's a bit like when we watch endurance racing, there's some series where you can only refuel and then change your tires. You can't do both at the same time.
But I don't understand endurance racing. How would I watch a popular endurance race and know what was going on?
Exactly. All that free for air content where they just stream it on YouTube. So difficult.
I was saying plug your Daytona 24-hour thing you're doing.
We
How
were
did
going to
you
leave
miss
that
that,
for the
Chris?
end. We were going to
Shameless
leave.
self-promotion. Chris misses the most obvious setup ever.
I felt too bad doing it.
Well, Christina's already ruined the tight opening by talking about what time it is in Canada for a pre-recorded show. So,
You know what? The people need to know what they're getting into. They need to know I'm sitting here enjoying my coffee with a cozy blanket and a cat. I think that's critical information. Just like it is that if you are curious about endurance racing, like Spanners mentioned, you can join Chris and I for our live stream of Daytona 24. It's going to be over on my Twitch channel. All of the times are posted on our socials as well. So if you just follow me over on there, you'll also get a handy dandy little alert. And we can answer questions that you might have.
I don't think actually I've taken your daylight saving into account though, so I think the Canada time might be wrong on the thing. But all you need to know is 10 minutes before the start of the Rolex 24, which is at 1:40 p.m. Eastern time, 6:40 GMT. That's when we're going to go live. We're also going to be live for the last 2 hours on Sunday as well.
if I can skip forward slightly in this whole recharging debate, if this works, and I wouldn't mind going back to the if of this, if this works, you're now changing the philosophy of Formula E quite significantly. And I think that you can't do anything about, obviously, the car designs this season. But in future seasons, if pit stops or multi-pit stops becomes part of Formula E, which I feel like it must for them to be able to go fast enough to gain credibility, go on the big tracks, then you're going to notice some subtle design changes. I think maybe you'll go, well, shall we design the front wing so that that's more changeable? Now we've got pit stops regularly. Do we do something with the tires? Do we go to more of a Pirelli Formula One model? It really does open up possibilities.
Especially with Gen 4. So they already said they're going on to like a semi-slick tire in Gen 4 in a couple of years. That should still last the whole race, though. I do think that in terms of the racing, they want to keep it about energy efficiency and the strategy being focused around utilizing extra power and managing energy. And that's why we've got a refueling type strategy rather than anything to do with tires, for example. So what we need to remember as well is that Formula E isn't just a racing series. It is a scientific experiment and a test lab for the future of EV technology. And what is the biggest issue surrounding EVs? It's the recharge times and range, right? So the fact that we're boasting this technology that says this will charge your car twice as fast as anything you've seen on the road before, and suddenly we can then put that into any old, petrol station, then that's the whole point of Formula E. It's to develop the EV technology, which of course stretches beyond what the car itself is capable of.
Mm-hmm. And in any moment that you have research, you always end up with all of these questions. And so now I have a laundry list as we're heading into Jeddah of things that I'm kind of wondering and looking at. Are we going to have a moment in any given race where, gee, the maximum number of cars that could be in the pits are 11, but we could end up in a situation where half of the grid is charging simultaneously and only half of them are on track. Depending on how long the pit entry and exit is, you are losing more than 30 seconds. And for charging.
And then the circuit breaker
So how much are they
goes.
going to be in and out of there?
Yeah, I hope they've got a big circuit breaker, because otherwise, oh, Derek, don't have your laptop on now. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, suddenly all the lights go out. Now, what's curious to me about this is that I think you'll see a lot of goal hanging. And we've used this term in Formula One quite a lot about if you start on the hard tire, you're basically waiting for a safety car. And I think a lot of teams might end up just waiting for what is quite an inevitable safety car in Formula E, bearing in mind the types of circuits we end up racing on and the aggressive nature of the racing
I
that we
thought you were
have.
going to say, considering the types of drivers we have on the grid, I'm glad you went to circuits.
No, nothing that crass. What we then need to think about is how is the pit lane going to be laid out? Because even though there's only one box in Formula One, you still get drivers queuing, and they've dedicated spaces, and there's a certain amount of space between the pit boxes as well to try and accommodate that so that teams aren't blocking each other. Has Formula E actually put any effort into that for the new pit lane in Jeddah? Now, that is actually, I believe they'll just use the Formula One pits there. So they might get away with it in Jeddah. But in terms of all these temporary street tracks that we go to, is that going to be the limiting factor of what determines, is this going to be a pit boost race? Because they've said it's not going to be every race. I imagine it will be reserved for the double headers, and they'll do one sort of almost like a kind of F2 where one's a sprint race with no pit stop, and then one's a slightly longer race with a pit boost. Can they only do it at tracks like Jeddah and Monaco? And do we still go to Misano? Is that a thing we still?
Portland.
I can't. Yeah,
We're not at
Portland.
Portland.
They're not going to Portland anymore.
We're not at
they're not
Portland
going
again. We're going to Miami instead.
Oh, Miami will be another one they can do it at, because that's obviously a permanent.
But that's a single header.
Well, maybe they'll just choose to do it there anyway. But I feel like they're going to be slightly limited on where they can do it, and they'll have to rethink the pit lanes now for any of the temporary tracks. Berlin, they might get away with it because, well, Berlin's just a blank sheet of paper they can do whatever they want with.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you also have, anytime you have a pit stop, there's the chance for error to happen.
Exactly.
Like, what are the errors that can happen with a fast charge? Obviously, they've tested it extensively, and they're fairly confident that it's going to work the vast majority of the time, but things always fail. They always do, especially when you most want them to work.
I mean, I've done a lot of mechanical testing in my life, and the phrase no plan survives contact with the enemy is probably applicable here. So in the tests, you'll be doing things in slow time. You'll be checking everything works. You'll be going through a procedure. I think the second it hits contact with the teams, I don't know if all the teams have had a chance to drill the procedures properly. But again, not in a race environment. And there's just that extra little bit of energy and pressure, and finger faults come in. Not only that, but it's an increased amount of tests. So let's say you did 4 or 5 real successful tests. Bring it out now. You've got 10 different teams who are all applying it, interfacing with their car and equipment. And you've just got more opportunities for things to go wrong. Prediction, somebody is going to lose a race result based on an error in a pit stop.
I think that's inevitable, but all the teams have had a chance to test it, and particularly there was a test in Mexico City during preseason testing. I think for the last couple of years, they always run a sort of simulation race in Valencia testing, and the last couple of years they've had the pit boost involved in that and testing it. So it's been tested in a sort of race simulation, but you're right, Spanners, it's never quite the same as doing it in an actual race.
And also, like if they've been practicing with Julie and Trudy and Derek, and then Derek's sick, and suddenly it's Jack who's having to be the one to press that button, you can't remember which one it is. So contact with the enemy will be fascinating. I think let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater though, because there is a potential for this to look super silly. So if we do encourage any of the mailbag people to come and watch based on this episode, just bear in mind that the chances of chaos is high, which is pretty much on brand with Formula E anyway.
100%. What I want to know is, well, how are they going to demonstrate it on the broadcast? Ooh. Because in Formula One, pit stops are very exciting. They come in, you've got 15 mechanics, you go 8 for 2.5 seconds, and then the car goes again, right? In endurance racing, the car's stationary for a lot longer, but you're still watching a lot of things happen. You've got 2 people running around the car changing tires. You've got the guy on the hose who hunkers down and hangs onto it for as long as possible. You've got a guy who jumps on the front of the car and cleans the screen as well. So although they're there for about 30 seconds, there's still a lot going on. Based on the videos I've seen of the promotion of the pit boost, they come in, a guy plugs it back and then stands back and then sort of checks his watch, and then pulls it out again. It's very undynamic. So I wonder how they're actually going to make it look interesting on air.
I don't know if it has to.
They could just not show it at all. They could just show someone coming into the pits, and then if there's a drama, cut to a camera there.
You're the reason there's sprint races in Formula One. I can't watch a practice session. Something has to be happening at all times. You're the reason they show replays because people get bored in the opening laps. And there's Chris going, 30 seconds, lame. I'm not sitting through all of that. TLDR, switch off.
Maybe they'll do the maze runner that they do on TikTok. You have the storytelling and Minecraft running in the background. This is what it's going to be.
Oh yeah, you can scrolling through TikTok and the bottom half of it is something else entirely, or it's like ASMR videos of like, you know, a knife cutting through a sand sculpture or something like that.
Exactly. Either way, I am curious about the graphics because you know they're going to come out with something, and it'll either be very helpful or it'll be something that we look at and kind of just go, great, another thing to keep track of. I think that's what's going to drive me a little bit mad right at the start is just on those races where we have pit boost, you're going to have 3 things to keep track of over 22 drivers. So little something to get used to.
Can I nick the first mailbag question then? I don't know if there is one similar to this, Chris, but you know, this is just a power boost that they can go and collect, or they have to go and collect from the pits. So in a way, this is almost like the old attack mode. It's just you have to go a really long way out of the way. You know how the old attack mode was like, it's a bit of a disadvantage, really. Maybe
but what they're not doing is they're not getting extra power from it. They're getting battery life from it.
Yeah. Oh, right. Okay.
So,
okay.
So they can go a little bit faster because they've got more energy, but
it.
It's not like they're getting an extra 50 kilowatts of power.
And they have to take it. So it's kind of the same for everyone. Obviously, you'd think the end game would be, you start the race with only enough energy to complete 60%. And then you have to come in.
No.
No?
No. There are rules about this. So big tangent. There was a regulation that had to come in a couple of years ago that determined a minimum state of charge in the battery for the start of the race. And that is because teams were not starting with, say, 100% so that they could get to the regen phase earlier. So it's really complicated. There is basically a graph that states how much regen you can do with a certain level of battery life remaining. And for the first 5 or 6%, it was no regen. And so what they were doing was they were starting with slightly less than 100% so that they could get to they could start regenning earlier in the race. And that was actually more advantageous for them. So then Formula E had to step in and write a rule that says, no, this is the minimum starting state of charge in the battery.
But you can just change that rule if you want.
But they won't, and they haven't.
Why?
So
no, come on. The whole point, the only reason to bother going down the recharging route is so that you can go, right, okay, you can do a long recharge at some point. Therefore, we can get these cars going a lot faster. We need Formula E cars going faster because everyone out there, Chris, in the motorsport world, people laugh about Formula E's overall speed. They laugh at Formula E.
And don't get look, in 5 years' time, maybe they'll do that. But for this first season now, it's all, you get the same amount.
Yeah, I'm talking about going forward, obviously.
Well, I don't know. I'm still here trying to work out how pit boost is going to work in the first race. You know, baby steps, spanners. And let's be honest, Formula E speed has way more to do with tires and the grip of the cars themselves rather than the straight line performance.
Very much to think about. And if it's any indication by how hyped up we are getting from this little conversation, it's going to be an interesting one to watch. So put it on your calendars. It'll be premiering at Jeddah in just a couple weeks' time. 20 days around, according to the countdown that's blinking at me on their website. Alrighty, let's get into the actual mailbag questions now. These are coming from listeners all across a whole bunch of different platforms. So starting off from the Patreon Discord, one from Brett. And this is sort of adjacent to Pit Boost. And it's, do we think attack mode is too effective, or are we enjoying the strategy that it's bringing to the races? And he also asks that, do we think it's a stopgap to pit stops for quick charging? Do we think that one day we're not going to see attack mode and have it just be that pit boost?
This also ties in nicely to what Lewis Ham on Twitter was saying. How is the fast charge going to shape races when it gets introduced in Jeddah? So I think attack mode is going to be a bit hit and miss depending on the circuit that we're racing on. We all saw in Sao Paulo, way too powerful because the straights were long enough that people could just absolutely cruise by, zero defense available. In Mexico, it worked fantastically because it was a traction race. And because the straights weren't long enough, they weren't able to utilize that extra power. And so the passes still had to be earned. And it was about fighting on the exit of the corner. And that for me is always going to be much more enjoyable, seeing drivers having to use their heads rather than getting pushed to pass or getting just an easy DRS take or anything like that, or what we saw in Sao Paulo, for example. I don't see it as a stopgap for quick charging because we've had attack mode for quite a few years now and it has worked quite well. I think the reason that people are on the fence about seeing them both together is because we've had 2 years of just attack mode rather than what the original intention was to have pit stops, recharging pit stops at the start of the Gen 3 era. But obviously the technology wasn't quite ready for it. And we've talked about we've had 2 years of delays. Well, what we're going to see from Jeddah onwards is kind of the original plan for Gen 3 to begin with.
I like it. I like the new attack mode, and I disliked the old attack mode because I felt like it was a Joker lap kind of thing. It was like a penalty.
It was a little bit.
Yeah, it was, and it was like, oh, okay. And then you never, all you were doing was giving up the positions in the train, and then you didn't really have the boost to catch it up. I think really, really bravo to Formula E to go there. Let's attach these front wheel drive engines and give you a bit more power. Now, this could end up being a stopgap to a point where you have more front wheel drive anyway, just in general. And then way down in the future, you get cars where you've got each wheel spinning independently, some of them able to go in reverse, and you're just basically going around 90-degree corners in a cinch in an instant. But yeah, this was a brave move by Formula E. And like, if you look at Mexico and you go, well, that's the least it's going to be effective, you go, actually, that worked pretty well. And next year, when they go to Sao Paulo, maybe they can go, all right, mate, let's be smart. And I think Formula E aren't as scared of changing things as Formula One, so they could even pare it back for next season and kind of go, well, we'll give you a little less juice because it was really overpowered, and it led to kind of this multi-class racing in Sao Paulo. I don't think the pit stops are going to interfere with that at all, really. This is a proof of concept, what they're doing in the pit stops. I don't think it's actually going to change too much when you look at the race.
What's interesting you say this, Banners, about Formula One.
All of it was interesting.
Well, what I found particularly interesting about Formula One not being as adaptable as Formula E, and it's not out of character for them to have race-specific technical rules. So in London, for example, we know that the London track at the XL, very slow, lots of very low speed corners, lots of big braking zones.
You say technical, not slow.
Yeah, sorry. Lots of technical sections. They probably could run that race flat out. So what do? They reduce the battery capacity for that race so that you still have a lift and coast and strategic element to the race. I don't see any reason why we can't adjust the capabilities of the front powertrain, depending on the track we're racing on, to modulate the effect of attack mode as well.
For my big thing, this is the first time that we're getting attack mode with all-wheel drive, and I'd be very curious to see if that results in them changing up where the activations are, because it is so powerful and it is different enough that I think the argument can also be made of maybe sometimes now, because it is so punchy, where else could you put it? Where else might it make sense to put it to give you something different? And I will say, when bringing up tangentially and just secondary thought here, I'm kind of annoyed that in 1 year we're getting both. Like we're getting both all-wheel drive and the pit boost
Hmm.
because it's just a lot to get used to. And as much as Spanners thinks, oh, well, they're going to behave independently, that might very well be true, but it's still, they're both going to impact the viewer's experience simultaneously. And
And
I don't like having two new things at once. That might just be a me thing, though.
no, that's an engineer
Spanners.
thing. That is an engineer thing, Christina. Like if you're trying
Yes.
to if you're trying to fault
Yes.
find and you're trying to solve a problem, always change one thing at once. So it's a valid point.
Spanners, I think they could be interconnected though, because these first two races, we've had quite a low delta for the attack mode, as in they don't really lose that much time when they take it. I mean, Mexico City, you barely lose anything. That's probably the smallest delta of the season. It's very different compared to some tracks where we've seen people lose 3-4 places trying to take it. And so in those kind of races, it would make sense that right after you take your pit boost, you're in free air at that point. So you're not losing positions. And so you're probably losing slightly less, or there's less risk to taking an attack mode straight after a pit boost sequence, especially if you're one of the first to come in. So I think we could start seeing them being paired up as a way to undercut cars in front of them, or equally you use it right before your pit sequence if you're staying out a little bit later.
And that'll hopefully give us very interesting fights, not just for the race, but also for the championship, which was sort of the second part of Lewis Ham's question, which was, reckon the championship will be between DaCosta and Roland, which, yes, right now they are P1 and P2 in the standings. DaCosta has 37 championship points, Roland 25. And here's the big thing. We are 2 races into the season. So while I absolutely want to go, yes, I would love to see a season-long battle between those two. Here's add a little bit of context for anybody who did not do the math. I did it. In the top 10, only 6 of them have got points. 6 of them have not gotten points in both races. That's in the top 10.
Yeah. Also,
4 out of the top 10 got points in both events.
Roland-
Barnard
yeah, go on. Sorry.
is in the top 5. Like,
Yeah.
this is a very, very, very early time in Formula E, especially to make predictions. But I would not be sad about a DaCosta Roland fight.
Roland got lucky to be. He's lucky to be in that position, and he's lucky to have held on to it as well because there was a bit of a safety car controversy. It was lucky. Come on.
You could also argue he was super unlucky in Sao Paulo though, because he got that technical infraction that had nothing to do with him.
My narrative, does it? So
well, no, exactly, quite. It's way too easy too early to start calling it, especially between 2 drivers. Like, you can't discount Verlaine, you can't discount Dennis, we can't discount Evans and Cassidy, even though for Jaguar the start of this season has been a bit of a disaster. But I would never
Evans
rule them
is
out.
still in 3rd.
Well, yeah,
Like, exactly.
quite. If you look at Jaguar as a whole, it's been very, very weak, despite Evans' extraordinary Sao Paulo drive. And Evans has come back from way worse starts in the season. Like, he didn't score points for like 4 the first races, and then suddenly won like a whole bunch of them. So no one's out.
You mentioned Dennis. Last season, I feel like he had this really good tactic of, because there was lots of peloton style races. There was a lot of odd races last season, and he would like stalk in 6th, 7th, 8th, and wait for the other drivers to get sleepy and then stalk. But I think with the attack mode now, they're not going to get sleepy, and so the first 2 races I've gone, oh, I think he's hanging back a bit too much. So I think he likes to have a bit more energy and be there at the end to predate on the front runners. I don't think that's going to work this season.
Well, I think Pit Boost is really going to not eradicate the peloton style racing, but I think it will.
That's because it's got to go, isn't it? It's got to go.
It'll erase it a little bit. It'll be like, when you're trying to rub something out and you never quite get it all out, and there's still like a little bit of a mark left. And you're like, oh, it's annoying. It'll be a bit like that.
It's going to spread out the field massively.
Yeah,
just because
probably.
of how much time it takes to get in and out.
But they'll converge back, won't they? Because you've like in endurance racing, you lose a minute and a half in a pit stop, but they all come
Oh
back.
yeah, but Chris, that's not a good example. Endurance racing, you go, oh, it's so exciting. The top four are within 2 laps of each other. You get that,
No.
and look, and it happened in our iRacing series when we introduced the pit stop. Actually, the reason we got rid of it in the end, but like Christina said, was because it spread out the field, and you could basically be in a chain of 5 cars and go, do you know what? I actually don't fancy this. This is slowing us all down. Let's get out of it and get into clean air. And then, yeah, you might get them converging at the end, but then you've got this gap in the middle where actually people can opt out of having a fight with each other.
Yeah, you're right. Races are all going to be won by 7 laps now.
Oh, that was passive aggressive. I'm gonna.
Coming from
Okay.
you.
I can go hang out with my family and get passive aggressive. I've got teenage kids.
Yeah, and I'm one of them.
Yeah. The honorary. Chris is always wanting to be the biggest picture on everybody's fridge. He wants to be honorarily adopted by everybody. He's gonna start sending out Christmas cards. Just
That
going.
is a thing in our family, by the way. If someone's like, "Dad, I did this," and I'm like, "Oh, that's so good. Let's put that on the fridge." Shut up, Dad.
Oh my goodness. Alrighty. Next question here is from Rachel 2000 on Blue Sky. I always want to call it Busky because of the shorthand of it, but sure, Blue Sky. And she is, for one, loving the podcast and it's helping her learn more. So great feedback right there. And also is wanting to learn more about driver style and the skills needed in Formula E versus other series, mainly F1.
So, I'm not a racing driver, but I've spoken to a lot of Formula E drivers about this particular element of Formula E, and so I'll try and provide as much input on this as I can. But essentially, let's start from the beginning. And like when you're approaching the braking zone in Formula One, we're told absolutely smack that brake pedal when you've got the peak downforce, and as the downforce bleeds off as you drop the speed, you have to sort of start coming off and sort of trail braking into the corner. And this is similar to any kind of single seater. In Formula E, there's no downforce, or like very little of it. So you can't attack the braking zone in that same way. You have to be so much more gentle with the inputs, what the drivers tell me. At the same time, you're having to pull the regen panel as well. It's not an automatic function; it's a manual element. So in the
That's
same
a
time,
pain.
you're going
Oh
in
my
on that
God.
left foot, you're pulling the panel as well. And I've actually been told a lot of times drivers will rely much more on the regen to slow the car down than the actual brake pedal itself. So that's a constant balance, and that's why I think you see drivers a lot of times just loop it in the middle of a braking zone because they've gone a bit too hard on the regen paddle. So taking into account the fact as well that they're running on basically road tires, they're not they're not race tires, they're not slicks. So you have to be able to cope with the car being quite floaty, and again, just not having an awful lot of grip. I think it rewards quite a smooth style, and then obviously getting onto the power as well. The instant torque from an electric motor, you have to be very, very gentle with it. You can't plant it. You have to ease in the power, and it's to the point where, when we saw the wet race in London, they would maybe be full throttle for half a second before they got to the next brake zone.
And all my experience is from the perfectly valid sim racing world. And so when you have a lot of downforce, like Chris says, you're getting on the brakes, you can bleed the speed off and you can start turning because there you've got maximum downforce acting on the car and you've got tons of grip and you can just throw it in. If you go down the formulas, say to Formula 3, Formula 4, suddenly you don't have as much of that aero to help you. So a lot of it is about early on in the braking zone, you're trying to actually weight transfer. So you're sort of gradually squeezing the brakes on and just moving the weight to the outside front tire, and then that gets you that grip, and then it's about kind of managing that braking level. So if you look at the trace in the F1 car or the really high downforce cars, yeah, you've got that big spike of brake at the beginning, if you look at a trace in the Formula 3 car, it's a squeeze on, like you would squeeze a trigger and not snatch at a trigger as
It's
they're
less
moving
of
the weight.
a cliff face in the braking trace, and it's more of a hill.
Yeah, so you're having to really steer with the brakes a lot more, especially on entry, I'd imagine.
Yeah, and I think that a really underrated skill in Formula E as well, communication with the engineers, because the engineers are incredibly limited by design of the regulations on what telemetry they're getting from the car, and that includes the remaining energy, right? And so there are a billion different numbers on the driver's dashboard that they're going to have to relay to them on a constant basis. And thinking as well about the drivers around you, thinking about the strategy. And we talk a lot in Formula One about a driver's mental capacity and how much of it is being used on the driving. In Formula E, you need to reserve so much mental capacity for things other than driving.
And it is likely that within this season, if Chris's ambitions are fully realized, that we're going to get to talk to a couple other drivers, much like we did last season. So, it looks like he's already excited. I can
Yes.
see the twinkle in his eye.
We've got a couple of them lined up. First one should be before Jeddah, hopefully.
Brilliant. Which means that if you have any driver-specific questions, things that you're curious about, do feel free to send them our way. That way, we can just get a good idea. We have curiosities, you have them. Two birds, one stone. Let's get these great interviews done.
I've got an idea. Sorry.
You've got an idea.
I'll clip me and Chris trying to describe the driving style you need in a Formula E car, and we'll just play that side by side with the driver's reaction to seeing that clip, and let's see how much they laugh at us.
Flawless. Let's add in a clip of me being like, their paddock style is horrible. I need more pizzazz, and see how they feel about that.
Why don't we just tweet that and then tag every single Formula E driver and just be like, how wrong were we? I mean, look, I'm just relaying what a few drivers have said to me. So.
I think the best way for us to learn and to talk more informatively is for them to just let us drive a car.
Yes.
Yeah, agree. How hard can it be? How hard can it be?
Hey, look, if Matt Gallagher can do it, then probably we can.
The wall, they've got little bumper lanes. The walls keep you in. It's like
Exactly.
It's like bowling with the bumpers on. Yeah, easy.
It's like bowling. You ping off them, it's absolutely fine. One quick thing I will actually say, just to sort of round up this question, is do not underestimate the power of software in Formula E. Software is like setup in that it's additional to the sort of baseline setup of the car. But software is so influential in how the car behaves on track and how the driver can extract the maximum performance. It is probably the most important element of any race team's operations and of the manufacturers as well.
Great things to consider as we're watching a race. Okay, our next and final question, really, it's a two-parter almost, and these are from two people over on Blue Sky. From Vishka, the first part is, I spent many years frustrated by how stratified F1 is. FE is a lot more unpredictable, competitive. However, that makes the seasons a lot harder to follow as there aren't many cohesive season-long storylines. And Leo Pasta, the second part of this question, is, how much do you reckon the inconsistent calendar hurts its popularity because of all of the gaps?
Yeah.
So it's essentially looking at the stories, how much time we have in between them. Do we think it's affecting how people can watch? And look, I do think that people's attention spans overall, it's a problem, and that's not exclusively a Formula E thing. We are just consuming a lot more brain rot, a lot more 30 seconds or less on TikTok. So it's not surprising that having this long of a time in between races is hard to stomach. But I think my biggest thing is it's not about the time in between the races necessarily. It's more so just the media circus that's around it. If you don't have a really strong media base, then it can be really hard to direct people's attention of what storylines they should be paying attention to. Here's stuff to keep you busy in between the races. And because Formula E is a smaller series, it just doesn't have that robust of a classic media, traditional, or of new modern media. Like, content creators just don't really do Formula E.
the media they often get involved that aren't motorsport as well are just so fascinated by the concept of electric cars in general. Maybe that has changed somewhat. It's been a couple of years since I was in a Formula E media center. But during my initial tenure, if you want to call it that,
Can't call it a
um,
career, can we? So tenure will do.
yeah, exactly. Well, you would get someone from a big magazine, and there would always be someone in a press conference who were like, "What's it like driving an electric car?" And I'm like, "Oh, Jesus Christ, we're gonna have this like for the 17th time this season." And then the worst one was do an impression of the Formula E car, which drivers just never took seriously at all. You're asking that in a press conference for goodness. Anyway, um, the gaps between races is a problem. The fundamental contributor to this is having a race lined up that then gets cancelled because of political turmoil or things aren't certainly agreed. Hyderabad has been a classic example of this. There have been races that were held illegally, and there were races that were like, yeah, we're coming back, and then, oh no, actually, it's a bit too close to an election. Can we cancel it? And so, and that's why we have a big gap after Jeddah as well, because we had a race lined up and it's been canned, right? And this is an inherent risk with going to these temporary venues. It's not the kind of thing that's going to happen for Tempelhof or for Monaco or for Jeddah as well. When we start racing on the actual streets, as is the more traditional Formula E and more of the roots of Formula E, they are the risky venues.
So I don't know how much of this is our fault as consumers or is Formula E's fault. I think Formula E's doing a fine job. It puts on a full calendar of races throughout the year. The broadcast is fine. And you can just tell, though, that it's not obviously got the same backing, popularity, weight of social media events around it. But then on the other hand, Formula One is so bloated now compared to what the actual races are. Even though the races are in good condition and there's fun races, the expectation and the build up to each event is now so big that it can't really live up to the expectations and the hype over the weekend. And the key to happiness is low expectations. And now to me, you go with Formula E, yeah, all those things are true that you guys have said, and it actually does kill me, the gaps between the races, but it's delivering a proportionate amount of media coverage and build up to what is a 1 hour race. So in a way, it's like, well, do we want it to get as bloated as Formula One? There's some low hanging fruit, which is the driver personalities. If you look at every other top flight motorsport, the drivers are megastars. Now, could you argue that the Formula E drivers are turning into megastars? Do any of them transcend the sport? Is there like
No.
a go-to driver? Is there a Lewis Hamilton? Is there a Lewis Hamilton in Formula E? Probably like not. Or even proportionally, is there a Lewis Hamilton, if that makes sense?
No. I think the closest thing they'd have is Jeff, because he's the only one who's won multiple titles, and even then it's only two. And Joe, my opinion on this kind of dovetails on what you were saying there as well, Spanos, which is always leave them wanting more, right? That's the golden rule. And to be honest, to the first part of this question as well, about more of the sort of in-season storylines, I wouldn't say there's been a lack of stories in recent years, especially like the last couple of years. For me, the storyline has been Porsche versus Jaguar. Whether that's with the works teams or the customer teams, that to me is the kind of battle, and it's nice to have the kind of steadier front runners, people who you know and expect to see at the front of a race. Where this became an issue for me was sort of in the Gen 2 era, when we had 18 drivers in mathematical contention for the title going into the final race. You could argue that's a storyline in itself, but it's also one that's incredibly difficult to follow.
Yes, when you have something incredibly competitive, again, going back to the question we just talked about, we have two drivers that are right up there in the points, but within one weekend, all of that could be eroded
Yeah.
and you get something completely different. And I think that that also makes it really difficult when you're a first-time fan. I think that's the biggest hurdle, is that in other series, you really do only have to learn one or two teams, a handful of driver names, and then you're sucked in. And you'll gradually learn about everybody else as you need to. But with Formula E, because it is so competitive, because you're going to have all of those drivers 10 plus for so much of the season being within reach of being competitors for the championship, I think it also fills you with all of this pressure to learn really quickly and get familiar with them so quickly. And when you have that much, I don't want to say homework, but it can feel like homework because there's so many stats, there's so much history, and you don't really know, have these drivers been rivals before? Have they been teammates? It's trying to dissect an absolutely massive amount of lore. That's just, again, because they don't have as strong of a media, can make it really difficult to dig around and figure out about.
Yeah, and I think this is a problem that kind of only gets worse when time goes on as well, right? Because take like Drive to Survive, for example, where the first season you're learning about all these characters, and yeah, they created some of their own faux storylines in it as well, but they were able to quickly establish a bit of lore, a bit of backstory when they introduced each new storyline, like the Ricardo one, for example. Like, here's why that Monaco win meant so much to him. Flashback 2016, and then, oh no, the tires and all this, right? With Formula E, obviously they don't have a sort of equivalent. They have tried documentary stuff, and it's actually been really, really good. But I don't think they've continued to make it. I don't know if there is a plan to do so for this season. I would certainly hope so, because it is really good and it is a great introduction to the drivers. And when Formula E was in its first sort of 5 years, it was still sort of quite approachable. You're like, oh, this guy's oh, this guy won it this year and this guy won it this year. Whereas now it's a bit, everyone's got backstories and everyone's got, lore, quite a bit of it as well. So I can see why there's an apprehension for some fans to dig in and learn so much.
And the most important piece of lore for anyone to know is that Jake Dennis, his flights will always be delayed.
Yes, that is the number one
without
thing.
fail. The one thing to know, and he's aware of it too, which also makes it funny, because you'll always get posts from him of just going, guess how long I've been delayed this time. It's fantastic.
To be fair, I'm very similar in our Missed Apex group chat about my flights as well.
No, Chris, you're like, oh no, my flight's been delayed 15 seconds. What will I do in this room specifically designed to entertain me as a consumer indoors?
The gate is not designed to keep you entertained, especially if you end up in gate 55 at Gatwick, where it's just chairs.
Okay,
what am I supposed to do? Play musical chairs, spanners?
Number one way to make airports more appealing is fall in love and have a couple of kids. And then airports are incredible. It's just like it's like a whole club. Yeah, because they're not there.
Sorry. I thought you meant fall in love with someone at the airport.
No, just in general. Fall in love, have kids fall out of love, and then really cherish that airport time.
just get a little airport romance going.
Oh, no, God, goodness. No, everyone smells at the airport. It's no good.
I was going to wrap up this one with an actual point, which was that I have been watching Formula E since day one. I have been in the paddocks, I've conversed with these drivers, and I've built up relationships with a few of them, and even I am still learning about a lot of the drivers and their backstories and elements of their life. And okay, maybe I go quite a bit deeper than some people, your average fan would, but nonetheless, there is a lot to take in.
It's okay though to not know about them. Like, you two are impossibly.
Yeah, that's true.
You two are impossibly young. Christina, not so much, in about a month's time. When you go over the precipice.
It's longer than that.
Oh, is it longer than that? You got a little
months left. I have months left, guys.
But
it's fine. It's fine.
If she was in
2 months,
if she was in Logan's Run, the red crystal thing is flashing vigorously at the moment. She's about to go to Carousel. But in the olden days of Formula One, the drivers really were this mysterious entity. behind the helmets. You'd get a little bit of a chat with them at the interviews or in a podium, but you really didn't know every driver on the grid. Like, I will challenge you to go back and remember being a fan in 1995. Did you know the entire Formula One grid? You probably didn't. Did you know who the team principals of every team were? No, you probably didn't. And now with Formula One, every single driver, you have these biographies. They're superstars, even if they're like at the back of the grid. Joe Guan Yu, great for a paid driver, doesn't get in too much trouble, seems like a fantastic lad. But in 1995, you wouldn't know anything about him. He barely would have come up. So maybe, Formula E, do we need to dissect what kind of puppy Sam Bird has? Like, I can live without.
Yes.
I can live without the endless Leclerc Instagram puppy stories. No offense, Christina. Sorry.
You take that back. Pet Instagram stories are critical to our survival as a species.
Wash your mouth out, Spanners.
Oh my goodness. I got a brand new camera and all I've done is take pictures of Squeaks and I have no regrets about it. On that note, he has come to grace us
Say
with his
hello.
presence.
Hello, Squeaks.
I heard his name.
But fantastic. Are you breathing, Spanners?
I'm
or you have
sorry.
something to say?
I just realised that a lot of people's questions were, how on earth do I watch Formula E? Can we just do a quick rundown of how to watch it in the major territories?
Right. No, here's what I'll say. Formula E website, top right corner, how to watch.
Oh,
Sorted.
They actually have a great toggle system. They upgraded it this year, not to get super nerdy about website design, but maybe they don't have
Oh no,
it.
she's gone off on one on GUI.
Oh, no.
On GUIs.
They changed it. Okay, I'm trying to remember, but there was a series that now has a great toggle system for where you can watch stuff. But Formula E's is also decent. It's a web page. It has a bunch of logos, but you'll be able to find it. It's fine. Yes. Another great way to just keep learning about Formula E, though, is just to keep listening to this podcast because we enjoy yapping. We enjoy answering your questions. And honestly, if there's enough people who just have questions about the lore, the history, and want to learn more backstories, that is probably something Chris and I could just dig into every once in a while. So let us know if those are episodes you would enjoy hearing.
And if you're a relatively new listener, scroll down on the feed a little bit. You'll find a few of the deep dives we did last year with Sam Bird, Jake Dennis, Lucas Di Grassi as well. And so that's a great introduction into those drivers because we don't just talk about necessarily directly the racing. I'll try and get into who they are as people.
Please watch the Jake Dennis one because Chris did such a bad job recording it. It took me 6 hours to save that and post-produce it. So please.
No,
I need
it was
the
the
views.
Lucas one where I had the wrong microphone selected.
Yes.
But
you wouldn't know. You wouldn't know. You can't see the seams. So please go and watch those.
Yeah.
There are many adventures of ours that you can listen in on. It's always a good time here on the Missed Apex Formula E podcast. So thank you for joining us for this one. Join us for more podcast episodes, race weekends. Will be around. Thank you for joining. We've had Spanners. We've had Chris Stevens. I am still Christina Lee Mace, and you can follow us all down in the description below. We will see you next time.